You could see quite a few opinions from famous and not so famous but still rich people out there talking about how we need to cut funding for academia, how academia in its current state is not efficient, how scientists, specifically those who work in academia and universities, should focus more on self-financing, etc., etc. Well, I want to say a few words about it. I want to share my opinion as someone who has been working with academia and researchers from academia for a while. I want to talk why it's a dangerous way of thinking, why we should preserve scientists the way they are, why we should look for other ways to increase efficiency of public research. In general, why I don't want to allow businesses to control scientific research. Hi everyone, I'm Lisa. I have this channel to talk about innovation, collaboration for innovation, including collaborating between academia and industry. And yeah, I'm making my introduction short today. So where is it coming from? The idea of changing academia and cutting its funding has been mentioned by a number of people, like Elon Musk, for example, who promoted cutting federal science funding in 2025 and 2026 via his Department of Government Efficiency. You might have heard this from Peter Thiel, who has also been advocating for cutting federal research funds in order to eliminate bureaucratic, low-impact science. That's his words, not mine, okay? He's been favoring decentralized private sector or independent research over traditional academic and government funding. I also saw an interview with Michael Gibson, who is a venture capitalist, and who said that in general, we need to eliminate universities. They don't bring us innovation, they stifle innovation. I mean, I tried to watch the interview because I do believe that you need to hear all the different opinions and views, even those you disagree with. It was very, very difficult for me to do it, so yeah. But I did watch the part about the universities. And there are more, of course. We might not see them or we might not know them, but they exist, especially among business people who have no experience working in academia. And I'm sure there are people everywhere in the world who support these opinions too. They do not exist only in the United States. I'm pretty sure they exist in Europe, in Asia, in all other countries. Are they right? No. I don't think they are. I mean, I think they're right to a certain extent, and I would also like to see less bureaucracy in science funding, less researchers doing projects just in order to receive funding instead of focusing on projects they are passionate about. I like to see more brave academic researchers tackling unconventional theories that are not popular in scientific communities. I'd love to see more creativity in scientific projects, but I don't think that cutting governmental funding programs will allow achieving those. If anything, this will create even more carefulness in research and focusing only on those areas and those projects that would promise commercial success. Now, let me explain why I believe that there is no way we should forget about public research done by public institutions, including academia. Look at this picture. It represents a quadrant model of scientific research, and it consists of three main quadrants. The fourth is rarely considered and not relevant here. Industry is mostly focused on applied research because that's where the money is coming from. Applied research is practical research. You focus on things that you can commercialize. Academia is focused on Bohr's quadrant, pure basic research, no real-life application. That's where academia and other public institutions thrive. But they are also responsible for a significant input in Pasteur's quadrant, which is about applied basic research, research that simultaneously advances fundamental knowledge and addresses practical problems. That's where academia and industry intertwine. And the more academia works with the industry, the more user-inspired basic research that academia provides. Now, what we must understand here is that public institutions, academia, are the primary source of openly available basic research, the shared knowledge commons, whether it's pure basic research or use inspired. And basic research is extremely important for us. Why? Because basic research advances our fundamental understanding of why phenomena work the way they do. It is about general advancements in different areas. Basic research drives economic growth. In my video about the Nobel Prize laureates in economic sciences of last year, I mentioned Professor Joel Mokyr and his theory of innovation-led economic growth that is based on the connection of propositional knowledge. Basic research is responsible for it, and practical one. There is no sustained economic growth without any of those. Our society develops and solves its problems because we conduct basic research. Products such as the internet, GPS, the touchscreen, the integrated circuits, lasers, nuclear power, and many more were created because of the research performed by public institutions. Basic research provides knowledge that can be utilized not by one single industry and one area, but by many. Basic research provides insights that can be more broadly applicable. That's why, for example, when we at Disruptive conduct our open innovation projects, we tend to invite teams not only from the specific areas of the client's challenge, but from adjacent areas as well. Academic researchers from such spheres might possess useful knowledge and provide information about advancements that can be adopted by the targeted industry. This is why, for example, for the challenge connected to adhesives removal, we might invite experts from polymer recycling. In her book, How Economics Shapes Science, Paula Stephan cites surveys and research papers that identify links between the industry and public research institutions. Let me share some of them. According to Cockburn and Henderson and their paper from 1998, 14 out of 21, or 2/3, of the most important therapeutic drugs that were presented to the public between 1965 and 1992 originated from the research done by public institutions. According to Edwards, Murray, and Yu and their paper from 2003, almost all drugs from biotechnology companies come out of universities. Then much of business innovation in all the different industries depends on breakthroughs made at universities. It is not only about pharmaceuticals and biotechnology that heavily rely on inventions from public institutions. According to the study published in the Science Journal, nearly 1/3 of US patents rely directly on federal research. According to the research done by the economist James Adams and his paper Fundamental Stocks of Knowledge and Productivity Growth, published in the Journal of Political Economy in 1990, accumulated academic science has measurable, statistically significant effects on manufacturing productivity. Andrea Gazzani, Giuseppe Martinet, Filippo Natoli, and Paolo Surico, in their recent article published last November, argue that publicly funded but privately owned patents, just around 2% of all US patents, account for around 20% of medium-term fluctuations in productivity and GDP growth. That shows how government-funded research is important for economy in general and for private companies that are interested in productivity growth in particular. These numbers and facts from research papers and surveys I've just mentioned show that all these businessmen promoting cutting costs on public research and eliminating universities need these publicly funded basic research so that they can innovate and grow their businesses. Publicly funded institutions they blame for slowness and low impact provide them with basic knowledge for their applied research, for their applied projects and products they're gonna sell. This public research gives them the foundation for new projects and allows them to finish ongoing projects. So the next question one might ask is, why can't business conduct basic research? Maybe these entrepreneurs have a better solution than publicly funded organizations. Maybe they can do it more effectively. Well, the truth is, they don't have a solution and they can't do it more effectively because basic research is not something that the business wants to do. First of all, because business needs to generate profits. Revenue, profits, money, those are the main goals of any business. And they need to generate profits now or in the near future. And basic research cannot give profits in the near future. Its commercialization is very time consuming. The average gap that exists between first finding in basic research and its impact on productivity is about 20 years, according to the research of the economist I mentioned before, James Adams. And many companies prefer to have their R&D projects for the periods from a couple of months to a couple of years. For example, the mRNA technology was discovered in the early 1960s. The first mRNA flu vaccine was tested in mice in 1990s, and the first human trial didn't begin until 2013, 20 years later. When have we started using mRNA vaccines? In 2020. Look at this huge gap. This is just one example. Now think about it. You might need decades just to commercialize the invention, but you also need time to even get to this breakthrough, choosing the promising ones while often in total darkness, when it's even difficult to predict which direction will work out. Companies don't want to do basic research also because basic research is too general. Companies need applied solutions, very specific to their products and their markets. It's very difficult to make a decision to invest money into innovation that you will commercialize and that will improve your current solutions when everything is going well. I mean, like, lots of companies struggle with innovation in general, even with incremental innovation, small innovation. It's almost impossible for them to make a decision to invest into something as broad as studying, for example, materials that may never connect to their product line. And that's one of the main complaints of innovation managers that I hear when we talk about working with academia for open innovation projects, for projects when the company collaborates with universities. They say that all these academic researchers provide very general solutions to their problems when they need something that can be applied to their products and processes at this very moment. Companies also want to do basic research because basic research is very risky. There is no guarantee that out of the solution you're pursuing, you will be able to generate any profits. Now, imagine investing millions, billions of dollars into something that might never become a commercially successful product. Businesses want to see a clear return on investment. It's understandable, but it's difficult to predict even with small applied incremental innovations. And of course, companies prefer to make safer bets. So business is rarely ready to invest money and wait for decades to commercialize an invention. And almost no company is ready to deal with a big amount of such projects because obviously you can't focus on one solution only. Business is much less forgiving to non-efficiency. Business inherently thinks more about short-term results, and basic research is not the area where you can expect those. Another point, basic research sometimes requires such big investments that no company can afford it. Sometimes governments of a few countries have to work together, collaborate to sponsor a big scientific project. Think about CERN and the Large Hadron Collider, which was built thanks to collaboration of a number of countries. Can you imagine any company doing that? Now, I want to be open and honest here. In the past, companies like DuPont, AT&T, Xerox, etc. had their own labs where they conducted basic research. Then the amount of private investments into basic research shrunk. The reasons were different. The mentality shift of business owners who started focusing more on the sole responsibility of a firm to its shareholders, the nature of basic research that implies spillovers that competitors might use, and that's not what the companies want, the rise of capital markets that were looking for certainty, and basically tougher global competition, and more. Recently, we can see that companies kind of started to invest more in basic research. At least this is the trend we see in the United States. Well, they just collect lots of data about R&D and show these data. So according to the report of the National Science Board, between 2012 and 2023, the share of basic research performed across all sectors funded by businesses grew from 21% to an estimated 35%, while the federal government's share of basic research funding decreased from 52% to 41%. However, there are certain reasons why the results of basic research supported by companies cannot be as good as what we get from the research supported by public funding. First of all, we need to look at the areas of research that have received an increased amount of private investments in recent years. We're mostly talking about pharmaceuticals and biotech, computer science and AI, engineering. We're not talking about material science, industries connected to chemistry and physics, where the time lag between first findings in basic research and actual application is 15-20 years. We are talking about areas where the results of basic research can be quickly adopted by companies. Like you make an advancement in AI architecture and you can almost immediately implement it into your product. So of course it makes sense to invest in basic research for these areas. Then, even if companies invest in basic research, they often do it in the wrong way. They have a too narrow focus, which is quite understandable. Once again, they need specific solutions for their specific applied challenges. Then their projects are too short-termed, too proprietary. So such research cannot generate the same results that the basic research from publicly funded institutions can. And companies rarely publish their findings. I mean, they do, but for public researchers, publishing is a must. It's a part of their job. Of course, companies want to protect intellectual property. They want to keep company secrets so that their competitors do not overtake them. However, this secrecy impedes further discoveries because inventions, they build on preceding inventions. New knowledge builds on preceding knowledge. We're able to innovate faster because public researchers share their findings, both successful and not. And that's important for companies in other areas too, because again, Basic research can be beneficial for a number of areas at once. So what I'm trying to say is that there is no way business investments nowadays can substitute governmental funding in science and basic research. Companies just cannot produce the same results, the results that would have the same impact as publicly funded basic research. Of course, I believe that we need to reform the current state of things. We need to find ways of making this time lag between the basic research done in the lab and its commercialization in products available to people shorter. We need to bridge the gap between academia and industry, and I'll be talking about ways of doing it in one of my next videos. But you cannot say that eliminating public research is going to fix everything and speed the innovation process up, because it won't. One thing to remember, there is no simple solution. A simple solution of cutting government funds has enormous implications on the lives of people, on our society, but also on business. These people who are advocating for these cuts represent everything. Everything in this world is interconnected. But science and research is not only about commercialization. We do science not only to create products and services that can be sold. We do it for the good of humanity. We do it to understand the world we live in, to satisfy our curiosity and endless search for the meaning of everything. We do it to live longer, happier lives. We do it because we care about our children and the elderly. We do it because we love achieving something, being discoverers and pioneers. There are lots of reasons why humanity does science. We do it to grow, to evolve. Basic research satisfies those needs. Basic research helps us understand where we live, who we are, and what we are surrounded by. That's why the second mission was sent to the moon, despite the critique from some Guardian journalists that think there are other ways to spend money. They always are. But this one is just as important as these other ways. And to be able to pursue those goals, all those goals that science and basic research helps us to achieve, we need to make sure that they are as independent from greedy shareholders as possible. Because we must study the craziest theories possible. We need to provide researchers with as much freedom as possible and as forgiving an environment as possible. We must let them make mistakes and conduct experiments that won't give any results until they give. Because this is the essence of science. This is the intrinsic nature of learning and discovering something that no one has ever discovered before. In my ideal world, scientists shouldn't even think about blaming themselves for not delivering any commercially positive result, because in my view, any results they achieve during their research gives valuable information we can learn from. Because in my view, failed experiments cannot be considered failed. They are successful. Businesses focused on commercial return, focused on revenues, will never be able to give scientists these opportunities. So the governments should step in. And as governments fail to support basic research for whatever reasons, we should find other sources for funding, because it is very important. It is complex and complicated. It doesn't promise immediate results we all want, but it is important. It is essential. Because this is about our future, our prosperity, our lives.